Hello, my name is Jonathan Tock, and I'm here at SpearTip's Security Operations Center in St. Louis, Missouri. What you see behind me is truly our operations center. So typically I'll get rid of the first question that always gets asked, which is that a real place or is it a green screen or a Zoom background? This is our true operations center that operates 24/7, 365 days a year, defending our clients and assisting them in fulfilling their own missions across the globe. Before I get started, want to, definitely we only have 20 minutes, so definitely want to jump into the MITRE framework and what we're all here to talk about. But just briefly, wanted to give everyone a quick background of who I am. Again, my name is Jonathan Tock. I have a master's degree in cybersecurity as well as a GCIH instant handling certification from SANS. I've spent roughly the last 5 years developing SpearTip's technical controls and operations to integrate with the MITRE framework, as well as just consulting with companies and raising their own security levels and preparing and handling cyber attacks before they occur on the proactive side, and then reacting and stopping active attacks on the defensive side every chance we can through our ShadowSpear platform. And so, again, only 20 minutes, so I know we got to jump right into the meat and potatoes of this. And to get started, I think really the best place to start is just to ask the question, what is MITRE? What is MITRE attack matrix? What is the framework? What does it stand for? And attack stands for adversarial tactics, techniques, and common knowledge. Which is definitely a mouthful, but the project was created with the goal of providing a globally accessible knowledge base for adversary techniques, tactics, and all based on real-world observations by cybersecurity personnel, and ever growing. So I think an important thing to note is that MITRE, even though it originally was formed in 2014, late 2014, early 2015, it's continuing to evolve. Initially, it was only for Windows systems. We've now integrated Windows, Linux, as well as cloud systems into that MITRE attack framework. The information is completely publicly available, very comprehensive. You should see a link here on the screen where you can go to the MITRE attack framework, see all these tactics, techniques, and procedures. And as you'll see, this is a ton of data. There's a lot to get into, and there's a lot of information. The first time I think anyone goes onto MITRE, they think, oh my gosh, what the heck do we do with this? What's the next step? Where do we really go from here? All of this data is great. It's great to see all of the different techniques and tactics and things, but what do we do as a company, as a security professional? What do I do with all of this information? And to begin to understand MITRE, I think what you really have to do first is you have to realize the overall way that MITRE is supposed to be broken down. And again, that's evolved, like the rest of MITRE, that's evolved over time, but MITRE really is broken down into, the attack framework is broken down into 3 main components. The first component being techniques. And what those techniques are key data types that the attack project really centers around. So this is a unique method that the community has identified in the attack life cycle that's being used by attackers to achieve their goal or achieve whatever the end goal of that attacker may be. And they're different demonstrable pieces of the attack technique within that actual process. So a great example of this, just to put all of those words into what does that mean, is the persistence technique. So persistence, being able to remain persistent in an environment and being able to actually stay within that environment regardless of what happens on the machine. So persistence is what's considered a top level technique within the MITRE framework. Getting down into a little bit beyond that, so you've got techniques kind of as the top of the cake. The next step down, the next tier is tactics. And what tactics are is structured data associated with that technique. So the associated techniques with the persistence tactic, for instance, is registry run keys. And what that means is utilizing registry run keys, or utilizing run keys to say persistent upon reboot, to say persistent even if someone changes the name of a user, to try to remain on that machine. So again, the technique would be persistence. The actual tactic used is manipulating those run keys. Being able to manipulate the registry in some way in order to actually get and stay on that host, be persistent on that host. Which all of that's helpful, but really what most people are trying to get to is, okay, okay, we know the technique, we know the tactic that's used. How do we stop that? What do we do to either stop it from happening, or potentially what do we do if we can't stop it from happening? What do we do to actually get alerted or receive some type of notification that this is happening? So that's where the final tier of the cake, which is procedures or mitigations, really comes into play. And procedure examples would include ways to mitigate registry run keys being used, or detect when a registry key changes, or detect when a very specific registry key changes. And this would also be where all of those examples of the threat actors that are actually using these techniques would be found. So as you dig in even deeper, you then get what groups are actually manipulating these run keys to potentially make a change, or potentially to stay persistent within an environment. An example of this would be APT19 if you're walking through the website, if you're walking through persistence mitigation and registry here as we go. And so all of that is at a very high level the way that you would break down and the way that you would utilize the MITRE site, the way that the attack framework was meant to continue to evolve, continue to be used. And so all of that's great data. Again, we talked a little bit about what is MITRE at a high level, what does MITRE do, and then how do you really break down MITRE into the different steps or into the different pieces of the framework. But again, the next step is, okay, again, all of this data, all of this really helpful information, what do we do with that? Where do we start? And so even though a lot of new tools and a lot of things will have MITRE built into it, one of the best exercises a security team or even someone new into security can do is to take that data and actually see how it relates to specific threats. So the way that I always recommend doing this is by doing things like reviewing threat reports. Hopefully most teams are already collecting, reviewing threat reports and getting samples of different threats within the environment to get down into really what a threat is performing. But the value of getting into a threat report and then relating that to MITRE, relating that to the attack framework, is that we can quickly analyze singular aspects of an attack to immediately know where in the attack lifecycle you may be running into the threat actor. So as you look at a threat report and you see the different things, one example is bits admin with APT41, and specifically using bits admin consistently through their attack lifecycle. You can break down that threat report, and then you can go to the mitigation step, you can go to the detection step and say, great, are we as an organization doing anything to mitigate for this specific threat actor? One, are we in the likelihood for the threat actor, or are we one of the likely industries? That's helpful, but as we know, as ransomware continues to grow and evolve, it's across industry, it's also across company size. Whether you have 10 computers up through thousands of hundreds of thousands of endpoints, you're still potentially vulnerable to these types of attacks. And so really by taking those threat reports and breaking it down into mitigating factors, detection factors, you're now not only understanding the threats better, but also understanding how within MITRE you can find those threats and potentially make sure that you have something mitigating control in place to stop that type of threat from really occurring. And it's something that with threat reports, very simple to do, very quick process going through that threat report, aligning it to an attack and making sure that you have a mitigating factor. And that's all good, but the next step is really the critical step. Very few times when you're involved in an attack do you know exactly what APT is attacking you, or know exactly what threat group is attacking you, and so you have to be a bit more flexible than what it seems like on paper, and that's where MITRE really needs to align to your overall orchestration and automation for responding to these events. So when we start talking about responding to incidents using the MITRE framework, you need to be able to leverage both products and information within the MITRE framework built into the tool to be 2 steps ahead of the attack, but also immediately understanding the risks that you're presented with. In the ShadowSpear platform specifically, every event that comes over, we're analyzing and actually identifying the MITRE attack presence that is connected to, or that would fall under, and that allows you to not necessarily, and that may not be something that on its own, seeing for instance a registry run key. If a registry key is changed, that isn't, registry keys are changed constantly throughout using a Windows machine day to day. That alone isn't a threat, but it's the that along with multiple other actions that then potentially could be something much larger. And it's really how you get into utilizing MITRE to find that you already have some type of compromise, or you potentially have a breach, or you are early on in having that type of compromise, or something happening within your environment that you need to be able to really dig into and find out what happened, where it came from, and getting into the response side of isolating that machine and figuring out what happened. And really this all boils down into the steps that can be taken to use MITRE to effectively respond to instant responses and to be able to collect that data very quickly. So through that, you're able to perform more proactive threat hunting. You're able to take these events and look at them across a range of time if you're collecting these events, and hopefully you're collecting and storing these events and the event data so that you can look at a period of time that this may have occurred or that there may have been changes. And then it really allows you to rapidly investigate and categorize those systems to say, okay, this is normal. We're used to seeing these types of events or these types of alerts as far as MITRE goes on these machines. That's not unexpected. It's not unexpected to see new users populate. It's not unexpected to see this type of user elevate privileges, but then you're building that foundation, you're building that baseline to identify pieces that fall outside of that baseline. Another, I think, key component of that is you're able to assess workload and identify the current state that you're in for quicker response and investigation. So building that baseline, being able to see that this falls under the persistence technique or it falls under a specific tactic allows you to be 2 steps ahead of getting to that investigation quicker and actually finding out where in the event life cycle that you may be. We already talked about this, but another key component is being able to align events to Ttps, so being able to align any event on the machine to an actual tactic, technique, or procedure, being able to pull all of those events and actually potentially even align it to a threat group if you do determine that it is something malicious. Some of the top security organizations or the most secure organizations that I've worked with, every event, normal, abnormal, is able to be aligned to what's going on the back end, being able to align to an actual tactic or technique, and being able to be orchestrated through their SOAR platform or through their automation and response platform. And so a lot of information all thrown at you again. We have a short period of time, but the key is being able to build your foundation, build your baseline so that you know what's normal, and then as those events that are outside of your baseline, being able to take those and turn them into a tactic, technique, procedure so that you can determine if it's a true positive security event or if it's just a false positive and it needs to be added and re-added to the baseline. So MITRE in full, can definitely be leveraged for a number of different reasons. Some of the most important is being leveraged for threat intelligence. So as we talked about, taking those threat reports, knowing that you have the right mitigating and detecting factors in place, knowing that you have the right pieces in place to be ready for that type of event and be 1 step ahead. The second piece, data source and gap identification. So making sure that you have the right information. You can only stop what you can see, which is a big part of being able to defend an organization. It's a big part of our ShadowSpear platform. Again, being able to collect all of this information, being able to collect logs, event logs, as well as security alerts within the platform, but being able to take all of that and identify gaps where you may not have the best visibility. For instance, if you have a network that's separate from your main network, maybe through an acquisition or through something like that, and you don't have those endpoints on it, you're not able to identify those gaps. That's obviously a large security concern. You're able to take that and make sure that you're forming those into your baseline. Also, potentially, you have another company you work with is another thing that we see often, where you don't have control over those endpoints or over those machines. And so it's just so important to be able to go there, take that information, and really get into what's going on there, but potentially raising the security level, raising the risk level with any information coming from that system or that network, or being able to take the right steps to reduce the risks associated with that network. And then the third piece is tool and analysis testing, all easily integrated into an open source platform. So another thing that we talk about often is utilizing MITRE to analyze tools and testing. So if you're starting from the threat report and you're identifying your gaps, your mitigating factors, your detection events, naturally you may need more tools that you need to bring in to make sure that they cover those. But it can also be used in the reverse way, essentially, of using MITRE to analyze and test tools that that you believe are a way to stop these threats. So if you know that you need the following mitigation techniques, being able to utilize that to go find a tool and then test that tool against those very specific mitigation techniques to make sure that you're hitting all of those rules, make sure that you're hitting all of those pieces in an open source and completely available platform. To talk a little bit about SpearTip and about how we leverage the MITRE attack through some other services as well. You know, MITRE is something that is not just for analysis, not just for, you know, specifically an instant response, but through our pre-breach and proactive advisory services, where we work with companies to plan for attacks before they occur, data gap analysis, security road mapping. You know, it's never a matter of if an attack's going to occur, but a matter of when that attack will occur, and being able to utilize a tool like MITRE within your arsenal really puts you a few steps ahead of that happening. Being able to leverage those proactive services, leverage what already exists, so that you can really be ahead of the attack and get into that piece. So overall, you know, really appreciate the opportunity to speak at this conference. Thanks everyone for listening. And next up, Tim Rebelli, a SpearTip advisory consultant, will be on the panel. Definitely stick around to listen to everything that he has to say. He'll be available for questions and really to cover anything surrounding the MITRE attack matrix or SpearTip that I may have missed, how we leverage those tools and those processes really to stay one step ahead of these threat actors that are consistently evolving, consistently changing, and running that cat and mouse game as we continue to grow. So thank you all, and really enjoy the rest of the conference.